I started working for South West Trains at the Operations Training Centre at Basingstoke on Monday the 5th of September 2005, and this began with a week's induction at Basingstoke Station. There were several other people on the course, coming from all walks of life and completely unfamiliar with the railway industry. The following week I had a crash course on rules and regulations, but was able to get this under my belt quite quickly because of my previous knowledge. One of the hooks to make me join SWP was Roger Luckin's promise that I would be involved in training drivers on Class 73 locomotives. SWT had 3 of these locomotives and were used as Thunderbirds, based at various locations should there be a problem with trains and assistance being required. They were also used by drivers at Wimbledon Park and Bournemouth Depot for shunting purposes. This photograph shows Class 73/2 electro diesel number 73201, one of South West Trains' rescue locomotives berthed on Hurdles Road siding, Woking. Previously numbered 73142 and named Broadlands, this locomotive hauled the Royal Train carrying Prince Charles and Princess Diana from Waterloo to Romsey for their honeymoon at Broadlands in 1981. On the 15th of September, I revised on the subject, ready to sit in on a Class 73 course the following week. At the start of the course, the trainer who should have been running the course was off sick, so I had to conduct the course myself. As there were only minor changes to the cab layout, driver's reminder appliance, DRA, and train protection and warning system, TPWS, plus slight differences to the braking system, this wasn't a problem, and I continued running the course with my old pal Chris Lemon and also running the driving instruction part of the course. The Train Protection and Warning System, TPWS, is a train protection system fitted throughout the UK passenger mainline railway network. It automatically activates brakes on a train that has passed a signal at danger or is overspeeding. Unlike automatic train protection, ATP, it does not aim to stop trains at or before a signal that is at danger. It aims to stop the train before the point at which a collision with another train could occur, excluding rear-end collision with a train in front. According to the Health and Safety Executive, it's estimated to prevent between 65% and 80% of fatalities that would be stopped by a full ATP system. The following week, Brian Cook, who was then in charge of operational standards at Friarsbridge Court, who I'd learnt Class 73 schematics with some years earlier at OTC, Waterloo, came down to Woking and assessed my knowledge on the Class 73 locomotive that was berthed on Hurdles Road siding, and for the next month I was booked to learn routes to London, Bournemouth and Poole, and from Basingstoke to Salisbury. Although the permanent way and stations hadn't altered much, some of the signalling had been changed, and in the 11 years I'd been away, what was most noticeable were the trees and vegetation that had grown considerably. On the 31st of October, I travelled to Wimbledon Park Depot with another of my old pals, whom I worked with at OTC Southside, Waterloo, Dave Webb, and he assessed me on my knowledge of Class 455 units. This also wasn't a problem for me, as I'd kept all of my training notes when I left the OTC Southside back in 1994. This photograph shows the motor alternator of a 455 providing a 3-phase output, 415 volts AC for heating fans including cab fans, 240 volts for main lighting and 110 volts DC for control circuits and battery charging. This photograph shows the MA indicator on the cab panel. Should the MA fault light extinguish in the cab, a 110 volt supply will still remain available from the battery or another unit if in multiple. This photo shows the Class 455 desk and driving controls. 1. Train Protection and Warning System, TPWS panel. 2. 3-step brake controller. 3. Driver's Reminder Appliance, DRA. 4. Emergency Bypass Switch, EBS. 5. Main res brake cylinder pressure gauge. 6. AWS reset button. 7. Speedometer. 8. Line indicator. 9. Automatic warning system, AWS indicator. 10. Motor alternator MA indicator. 11. Uncouple button with safety flap. 12. Power controller. 13. Master switch. This photograph shows the positions of the 3-step brake and its relative bar pressure in the brake cylinders. This diagram shows the Class 455 brake continuity wire. Unlike the electro-pneumatic brake fitted to slam door stock that failed to apply should there not be an electrical supply, the brake continuity wire works in the opposite way, in the fact that an electrical supply is required throughout the train to allow the brake to be released. The supply is fed from control supply MCB to the rear of the train's rear cab and through a series of equipment that must be set in the correct position. Example, in the rear cab, master switcher off, brake control MCB set, driver's brake controller DBC not in the emergency position, drum switch in the uncoupled position, main res governor MRG closed, all passenger emergency switches PES must be in the correct position throughout the train. Front cab, emergency bypass switch EBS at normal, main reservoir governor MRG set, drum switch in the uncoupled position, brake control MCB set, AWS MCB set, master switcher on, and the driver's brake controller DBC at any position other than emergency. Any one of these safety devices not being in their correct position will keep the brake applied throughout the train. The following diagram shows the Class 455's control supply circuit. The motor alternator, or battery, provides a 110 volt supply via the control supply MCB to each cab for control, AWS, brake supply, door control 2 and compressor control. It also supplies a feed to traction control and the wheel slip protection. My next job was to train some of the depot drivers at Wimbledon Park on the Class 73 locomotive, and the driving instruction was performed in the sidings at Durnsford Road. This was followed by a further course for Wimbledon and Bournemouth drivers at Basingstoke for the classroom instruction, followed by practical instruction with booked training trips from Bournemouth Depot, Poole, Eastleigh and return, utilising 4 VEP Unit 3417 Gordon Pettit, named after the former General Manager of the Southern Region and British Rail, as part of the train. As part of my ongoing personal development, I was given the task of updating the Class 73 Faults and Failures book and handout for drivers, which I completed in December 2005. The first 2 weeks in January saw me return to Bournemouth to train 2 depot drivers, only to find that the locomotive had been left on non-electrified siding and the batteries were flat. They didn't have any other means of towing the locomotive over a siding with a conductor rail. Had this been possible, I could have pumped the shoes down onto the conductor rail and recharged the battery. Instead, we had to delay the start of the course until the following day. Here are some photos that I took during the training session. Following instruction, Bournemouth DSM Richard Trellis demonstrates the dual control capabilities of the Class 73/2 electro-diesel locomotive to fellow DSM Steve Smith during the training trip to Eastleigh. This view of the cab shows both driver and second man positions. As you can see, the controls are duplicated on both sides for shunting purposes, but the controllers can only be changed from the driver's side. A button has to be depressed on either controller to place them to the lock-off position to enable the other controller to be opened to a power position. The electrodiesel were designed to conduct shunting operations and haul trains in and out of marshalling yards where no electrified lines were present, utilising a powerful 600 horsepower four-cylinder diesel engine with excellent torque. Control of current to the traction motors is governed by the speed of the diesel engine under the control of a load regulator, which in turn is governed by opening and closing of the diesel controller. Once the locomotive has left the yard and over the conductor rail, the collector shoes would be lowered with compressed air, the diesel controller closed to the lock-off position, and the electric controller open to any position of power, i.e. hold or any other of the run-up positions. Once this is done, the diesel engine will be switched off by pressing and releasing the engine stop switch. This photo shows most of the Class 73 cab layout features and a 1. Main reservoir air brake pipe pressure duplex gauge, 2. Brake cylinder pressure gauge, 3. Diesel controller, 4. Electric controller, 5. Master switch, 6. Doughty indicator flags, 7. DRA driver's reminder appliance, 8. TPWS train protection and warning system, 9. Speedometer, 10. Amp gauge, 11. Route indicator box, 12. Engine stop switch, 13. Auto engine start switch, 14. Aux power off switch, 15. Aux power on switch, 16. Cab secure radio system, 17. Overload reset, 18. Fire alarm test, 19. Preheat trip, 20. Cab heat driver's side, 21. Preheat on, 22. Cab heat second man side. To understand the sequence of events on electric operation, it must be remembered that it would be impossible to apply full line voltage to stationary traction motors without introducing resistances into the motor circuit to reduce the flow of current. Upon starting, all resistances are in circuit. To gain further acceleration, the resistance camshaft must now progress to close the R switches, R1, R2, R3, R4, etc., to progressively short out the resistances. As the locomotive gathers speed, the back electromotive force, back EMF, of the traction motors tends to oppose the applied voltage and so gradually dispenses with the need for resistances until finally R19 and R20 contactors close to short out all resistances in circuit. The traction motors are now running in full series with no resistances in the circuit. If further power is required, the electric controller is moved to notch up or series run up, and contactors will close to allow the first step to transition from series to parallel working. To meet the sudden increase in current when paralleling the traction motors, all the resistances are again put back into the traction motor circuit. This time resistances are removed in pairs, R1 and R2 together, R3 and R4 together, and so on, until 10 steps have been taken to short out all resistances. The locomotive's motors are now running in full parallel with no resistances in circuit. Further acceleration can be obtained by the weak fielding camshaft, introducing field diversion switches in 4 stages which effectively reduce the traction motor's back EMF, thereby increasing the applied voltage to attain more power. With this type of control of power to the traction motors, the locomotive's versatility comes into its own, and speed of trains can be adjusted accordingly to the range of power positions at hand. The locomotive can even be worked in the series weak field position by moving the master switch to forward series, which will allow a further range of power to be applied to the traction motors. The next photograph shows the camshaft positions from notch 1 to 20 to reach full series, and full series to parallel weak field or series weak field, depending on the position of the master switch. This is more commonly known as the notching tree. It was always taught that to avoid snatches to attached trains, the ammeter should not register more than 500 amps when passing through conductor rail gaps. High amps being drawn, especially at low speed, could also introduce the risk of severe arcing from the conductor shoes when leaving the conductor rail, which could result in a fire. The following photograph shows 73/1 number 73109, Battle of Britain, about to pass under Campbell Road Bridge, Eastleigh, with the 5Z99 1248 Eastleigh to Bournemouth Depot. The stock comprising of 3 SIG 1498 Farringford and 3 SIG 1497 Freshwater. The two units were being turned via Fareham to help preserve the wheel life and even out the wear. On the 23rd of January, I sat in on a 10-day Class 159 course at Salisbury, and because of the logistics of the static instruction, a meeting room at the back of the train crew supervisor's office was utilised for the classroom training. Here are just some of the basic points covered on the 159 course in the classroom. The diesel engine system, main exterior equipment, the hydrostatic system, power arrangement and traction interlock. Static instruction was then carried out at the train care depot, and driving instruction was carried out utilising service trains between Salisbury and Waterloo in return to Salisbury. Class 159 Basic Cab Controls. 1. Driver's brake controller. 2. Headlights tail light switch. 3. Main res air brake cylinder pressure gauge. 4. DRA driver's reminder appliance. 5. Speedometer. 6. Windscreen wiper. 7. Two-tone horn. 8. AWS reset button. 9. Couple uncouple buttons. 10. Engine start and engine stop buttons. 11. Transmission fault lights, unit or train. 12. Signal bell button. 13. Emergency brake plunger. 14. Power controller. 15. Master switch. And 16. WSP fault light. The Class 159 continuity wire. Unlike some of the other classes of electric units, 455s etc., the Class 159 has a number of extra features that have to remain in the normal or set position for the brakes to release. Once the driver opens the master switch and cancels the AWS, a 24-volt current from the battery passes through a contact in the driver's brake controller in the rear cab, as long as it's not in the emergency position, through the train control and brake control MCBs in the set position, main res governor in the set position, emergency brake plunger not depressed, emergency bypass switch in normal position, couple relay in normal position, all doors closed on rear coach, all passenger emergency switches in normal position on rear coach, all micro switches set, all doors closed on middle coach, all passenger emergency switches set on middle coach, all micro switches set, train control and brake MCBs set on middle coach, main res governor set on middle coach. On the front coach, all micro switches set, all passenger emergency switches in normal position, all doors closed, couple relay normal position, emergency bypass switch normal position, main res governor set, compressor speed up switch not depressed, DSD stroke vigilance not activated, emergency brake plunger in normal position, brake, train control and AWS MCB set, and finally the driver's brake controller in a release position. To test understanding, I would then simulate various faults on the unit beforehand, some of these being breaks in the continuity wire, and ask the trainee to prepare the unit for service with the brakes being able to be released in the driving cab. As previously shown, there were quite a number of places where you could break the continuity wire. At my one-to-one meeting with Roger Luckins, it was agreed to run a core trainer's skills course. This was designed to be similar to the one that I'd been on at the Management Training Centre at Watford some years previously, and this was completed at the end of March with considerable success. Phil Eek, who also worked within Operational Standards Friarsbridge Court, then taught me all that was needed to know regarding the 4 simulators that had been installed at the Operations and Safety Training Centre, which were used for extensive driver training. The simulators had been built by Krause-Maffei-Wegmann KMW, a German company, and simulated the driving controls of the new SWT fleet of Desiro units. This shows a trainee in one of the 4 Desiro simulator cabs that can be run simultaneously with 4 separate trainees. Apart from driving technique, a whole range of faults can be simulated to test the trainees' reactions. This shows correct cab procedure and safety critical radio communication in action. This photo shows trainers Dave Webb and Chris Lemon monitoring the progress of the students from one of the 2 simulator consoles. In March 2007, David Timothy had to travel over to the Isle of Wight to assess a driver instructor. As I'd been involved in Class 483 training before, as mentioned in the previous chapter, I accompanied him. The aged Class 483 units, originally built in 1938 for London Underground, were extensively refurbished between 1989 and 1992 at Eastleigh Works. Nonetheless, the 70-year-old units remain the oldest trains operating in service in Great Britain. Note the copious use of gaffer tape in this photo of me at the controls. These units are equipped with 2 braking systems, electro-pneumatic EP and a Westinghouse automatic air brake should the EP brake system fail. The dead man must be held down with a constant pressure at all times that the train is moving. Should the driver become incapacitated at any time, the automatic air brake will apply the brakes and power to the traction motors will be cut off, thus bringing the train to a stop. Apart from having different liveries, they hadn't really changed. My wife Pauline and I recently took a trip from Ryde Pierhead to Shanklin and must admit that the new Class 484 units were certainly more comfortable than their predecessors. This was probably a combination of both the new units and track improvements. In June 2006, South West Trains drivers called for industrial action, which meant that as managers, my colleagues and I were expected to take on the role of driver or guard during the time the drivers were on strike. By this time it had been realised that I'd not received a full medical examination, so I had to visit the SWT Medical Centre at Friarsbridge Court. 3 of us went for the medical that day, and imagine my surprise when my cardiogram results came back as having an irregular heartbeat. I was put on the restricted category, which meant that I couldn't drive trains until I'd been past fit. A week later, I attended a cardiology appointment at Harley Street and saw a Dr. Fole, a consultant cardiologist. I was wired up and put on a treadmill for 30 minutes to perform checks on my heart. The following week I had to return and was fitted with a heart monitor for 24 hours, taking it back to Harley Street the following day. The following week, my wife Pauline and I went to the surgery again, and Dr. Fole said, "There's nothing wrong, you've got the heart of an athlete." To which my wife replied, "Shame he hasn't got the body." By the end of the month, I was pronounced A1 and fit for driving again, and on the 29th of August, when SWT drivers had another strike day, I worked my first train as a driver, this being on my own in a driving cab since I was an acting instructor back in 1986. I was booked 4 trips from Waterloo to Hampton Court and return with a Class 455 unit, but didn't have to work the last trip as it would have necessitated a taxi home. During my one-to-one meeting with Roger Luckins, he informed me that he had been offered a position with the RSSB, Rail Safety and Standards Board, and asked me if I'd like to take on a temporary role as Assistant Operations and Training Manager, which I gladly accepted. This again meant that I had to take on a lot more responsibility, not only for the running of the training centre, but also the staff within. This meant I had to attend quite a lot of meetings at Friarsbridge Court regarding training, and also resource planning meetings every month with the head of drivers, held at the ONSTC Basingstoke. Following Roger's secondment to the RSSB, it became apparent that he wouldn't be returning, so it was decided that Chris Lemon and myself should jointly run the training centre, Chris being in charge of the trainers' competencies, and that I should be in charge of the everyday running of the establishment. We would also both have to take responsibility for conducting performance reviews on the staff, and on the 12th of February we both moved into what was Roger's office. Apart from Chris and myself, there were 13 other trainers at Spring Park House, some of which I'd worked with at OTC Southside, namely Chris Foote, Tim Reynolds, Dave Webb and David Timothy. The other trainers were Jerry Bond, Pat Gray, Nicky Harris, Paul Wallace, Lionel Stevenson, Dennis Birch, Jez Morgan, Andy Nash, Nigel Trower and Peter Connolly. I'd also been given the job of updating the 159/1 driver's handout, as some of the fleet were being refurbished, and I subsequently went to Derby to take photographs of the changes made. Here are some examples of the discovery learning that took place at the time that I was at Basingstoke OSTC. The first being one of the trainees explaining the rules regarding temporary block working. More superb flip chart creations follow. Definition of accidents, protecting a failed train, signals that become difficult to see, CCTV at level crossings, AWS, automatic warning system track and cab equipment, where not to stop your train in an emergency. Here are some fine examples of the principles of route learning, where every student is invited to participate in the creation of a route map. This photograph shows basic driver course students flanked by their trainers, Jez Morgan and Jerry Bond. Because I'd had a previous experience with programming software, whilst I'd been employed by Surrey Police, I offered my services to put together some computer-based training CBT packages to supplement the training already in place. The program used to author the packages was made by Macromedia and called Authorware. With the help of Merv Young, my good friend from my Surrey Police days, I was able to program a welcome and introduction package to be shown to students on a plasma screen in the students' lounge. This gave students and anyone else visiting the building clear instructions on where everything was situated within the training centre, plus safety procedures should there be a fire. It also displayed all of the trainers' names and photos and in which room their course would take place. Several other CBT programs were introduced into the training sessions using a drag and drop principle, which allowed student participation and prevented boredom. These CBT programs were also available for students to use during their leisure time. SWT drivers were also visiting the Operations and Training Centre for their driving competency assessments, with scenarios being carried out using the simulator. This photograph shows the driver's competency simulator assessment over a 4-year cycle. Drivers had commented that whilst undertaking their rules assessments, they had found that some types of degraded working and out-of-course situations were difficult to comprehend. They say that a picture paints 1,000 words, and situations would be much simpler if they were demonstrated by use of scenarios as shown. Therefore, a driver's competency cycle assessment was designed to incorporate these concerns by reenacting these events by the use of simulators. From top left, passing signals at danger with authority, temporary block working, giving and receiving cab secure radio messages, safety communications protocol, special stop orders, assisting a failed train, rectification of minor faults, and single line working. On the 25th of June 2007, Chris Lemon and I trained 2 Bournemouth depot drivers on the Class 73 locomotive, and Pat Gray, one of the trainers, needed a refresher and assessment, so we all went to Bournemouth depot for the day. Chris found a set of tools on the locomotive and he thought he'd practice his dentistry skills again, this time on Pat Gray's molars. Here's Chris again explaining the low tension cupboard layout, and here's Pat Gray inspecting the water level in the header tank whilst in the engine room. In July, I had to conduct an assessment on Pat Gray for Class 159s, as he'd recently learnt the traction. Pat worked the train from Basingstoke to Salisbury and relayed to me his route knowledge on the way. We then visited the train care depot and looked around a Class 159 unit, Pat showing and proving to me his knowledge of the unit and his training capabilities. As all of the trainers had worked extremely hard during the year, it was decided to close the training centre on the 14th of September and have a team day at the Great Cockcrow Railway at Lyne near Chertsey in Surrey. The miniature railway is fully signalled with 3 signal boxes and 1 gate box to prototypical British signalling based on mid-1950s practice. Nigel Trower, who was a member of the railway group, organised the event, and apart from incorporating a work element, we were all able to really enjoy ourselves. Hardwick Central Station, Cockcrow Hill Signal Box, driver David Timothy at the controls of Eureka, signaller Chris Lemon at the frame of Hardwick Central Signal Box. With red flag held steady, hand signalman Peter Connolly explains the rules. Geoff Burch proving there's nothing in between his ears. Nigel Trower and his U-Class 1803. Tim Reynolds in his element. Dave Webb driving U-Class 1803. A group photo with a well-deserved team day out at the Great Cockcrow Railway. It was decided to have a works Christmas party, so Chris Lemon and I organised this to take place at the Red Lion Hotel, Basingstoke on the 14th of December. Special awards were also given out that evening with an award shield for the most outstanding trainer. Guests of honour at the Christmas function were retired OTC Southside trainers Mick Oakley and Fred Johnson, with their respective wives. Trainer Jez Morgan was the winner of the SWT Training Centre Outstanding Achievement Award Shield 2007. Certificates of appreciation were also awarded to Nigel Trower, Tim Reynolds and Peter Connolly. The training manager's post that Chris Lemon and I had been covering was advertised at the end of 2007, and Mark Sellis was the successful applicant. Mark hadn't come from a previous railway background, and when he joined us on January the 14th, Chris and I soon put him at ease, showing him the ropes, so to speak. Quite a few changes were made to the training centre, and I was kept busy during the year running Class 159, Class 455 and Class 73 courses. It was then agreed that I would work a flexible 4-day week, and invariably I'd have the Friday off or the following Monday to make a long weekend. A new position of training design manager had also been created, and I was advised to apply. This was not contested and meant that I had secured the position and would be given 2 other trainers to formulate a training design team. The Class 455 fault cards issued to drivers was the first of our tasks. The customer services team at White Rose Court, Woking, were also going to merge with us and become vocational training, so I designed a similar welcome package for their display screen situated in their students' lounge. I also designed a welcome pack for students visiting either centre. I was also asked if I'd like to be the official photographer for the SWT Long Service and Retirement presentations, and it was also thought a good idea that students should receive a group photograph at the end of their course. In September, we returned to the Great Cockcrow Railway for another team day and again had a great time. First, we had Paul, Keith, David and Jerry. Jerry at the controls of View Class 1803. Keith passing Hardwick signal box. Kirsty Angel at the controls. Anne Hode with U Class 1803. And the group photograph at the end of another successful visit to the Great Cockcrow Railway. One of my tasks as training design manager was to look at different ways to progress the learning process. Part of the driver's course included route learning, where a trainee would be taught a particular route and asked questions about it at a later date. While learning the route from the cab of a service train, the trainee would not only observe the route, but would make notes of the various line-side features associated with it. These included signal positions, speed of line through points, crossings and junctions, and structures such as bridges, etc. It was thought a good idea to produce a number of photographs of these features at different locations along the route. These photographs would then be shown to the trainee with the identification points removed, and the trainee would be asked to identify the location and line-side features associated with it. In order to construct this exercise, my work colleagues Chris Lemon, Jez Morgan and I, Chris driving and Jez and I armed with their Nikon cameras, took a series of photographs from the cab of a Class 455 unit over various routes. Some of the results are reproduced here. The first shows the approach to Hampton Court Junction on the up main local. Signal with green aspect to continue on the up local line. Line-side features include A. Vertical white diamond sign, coasting board. B. Permanent speed restriction indicator. C. Converging line from Guildford via Cobham. D. TPWS grid. E. Horizontal white diamond sign with black X signifies that the line-side telephone must not be used unless in an emergency. F. Signal post telephone, direct line to signaller. G. Junction indicators, position 4 and 5. H. Overbridge leading to Hampton Court Junction. I. Hampton Court Junction substation. J. Track circuits. This photograph shows the approach to Waterloo home signal on the up main slow line, showing a signal displaying a yellow proceed aspect with junction indicator 3 to indicate that we have a clear route into platform 3 at Waterloo as far as the buffer stops. Line side features include A. Signal gantry with other signals for different incoming lines, from left to right. B. Windsor reversible. C. Up Windsor. D. Up main relief. E. Up main fast. And F. Up main slow. G. Position light signals. H. Theatre box indicators. I. AWS magnets. J. Track circuits. K. Signal number, in our case W2. L. Waterloo substation. Here are just 2 pages from the Principles of Route Learning Assessment. Do you know the answers? This photo shows Claire James, Bournemouth trainee driver, receiving her award from trainers Geoff Burch and Chris Foote for achieving a perfect score at the final BDT Rules Assessment December 2008. The next photograph shows the Basic Driver Course BDT 3, December 2008, flanked by trainers Geoff Burch and Chris Foote. Whilst visiting Salisbury Signalling Centre one day and looking at a model railway that had been used as a training aid, it was decided to have one built for the training centre. This was duly sanctioned by Martin Peakle, Head of Operational Standards, and was built and fitted by a Salisbury signaller. The model layout built in 00 gauge with superb detail. A variety of incidents could be introduced to show students the implications. In January 2009, I performed my final Class 455 course, and in February, because there had been a slump in the economic climate, my job as training design manager ceased to exist. Mark Sellis informed me that I still had a job as a trainer at the OMSTC, but I would have to return to working a 5-day week, which I didn't relish. A voluntary severance package was also on offer, and with some hesitation I decided to take early retirement. I'd enjoyed my time with South West Trains and working on the railway again, and had made a lot of new friends. Now in retirement, I've had time to write about my experiences and still keep in touch with friends and colleagues that I've had the pleasure of working with over the years. I did continue taking photographs for a number of years at SWT and SWR award ceremonies, sometimes meeting up with drivers that I'd passed out for driving some 20 years earlier as they received their long service in retirement awards. I hope that you've enjoyed following my ramblings, and we'll be continuing with the epilogue of this book soon.